So our second speaker this afternoon is Jordyn Burnouf, the land-based practitioner and youth leader. Jordyn is a proud Cree Métis woman from the community of Île-à-la-Crosse, Saskatchewan, and a member of the Black Lake First Nation. She's a recognized leader in clean energy, environmental stewardship, and Indigenous youth advocacy, working to bridge traditional land-based knowledge with sustainable energy solutions. A passionate learner, Jordyn studies at the University of Saskatchewan in the Masters of Sustainability and Energy Security. Her deep connection to the land fuels her advocacy for Indigenous-led climate solutions and the need for culturally grounded approaches to sustainability. Her presentation today is entitled Environmental Stewardship and Indigenous Youth Advocacy. Please welcome Jordyn to the stage.
I think that's good. Yeah. Damn, I feel tall. First time ever. Tanse. I'll teach you a little Cree saying, okay? So you say, my 9 toes. Come on. It's actually Nmoinan toe, but you won't forget that now. When someone says Tanse to you, it's usually a question. How are you doing? Nmoinan toe is, I'm doing good. So I hope I didn't force you to say you're doing good, and I hope you're just doing good. So do I have green button, I assume? No. Okay. Laser pointer. Okay, yeah, this is kind of pulled from the agenda, but some of the things that we're going to go through today. Yeah, I'd like to start with an introduction. Hanse, Jordyn Burnouf, Nisihgasen, Sagatawak, you see it written up there, Oste. The community I come from is Île-à-la-Crosse, or as we know it in Cree, is Sagatawak. Sagatawak means where the rivers open up, or an opening. So you might hear Sagatawak being referred to a bunch of other Cree communities around the way. So what I want to share first is a little bit of history. Okay, so the history of my community, and why this is important is because I think place and time are very important considerations when we're talking about the topic of climate change and specifically climate adaptation. So Île-à-la-Crosse is a historic Métis community. There's a lot of Métis and First Nations people there. And the history actually roots back to a time when people lived on islands. Cree and Dene people all lived on these little islands all around this little area where a peninsula was created. And the peninsula was Île-à-la-Crosse. And so this area was actually a point of interest when settlers came and started expanding from the Hudson Bay, because the water flows from the Hudson Bay to Île-à-la-Crosse, and there's actually a continental divide just north of us. And so the water will flow to the Hudson Bay and then out to the Arctic. And so that very, very long river that flows all through Canada, we're kind of a key part of that, because when settlers came in, that was one of the main fur trading posts in central Canada before it was Canada, before Saskatchewan existed, before Canada existed. One of the other really interesting things about my community is we're in a municipality, so about 98, 99% Indigenous, both Cree and Métis people. And so why this matters, that it's a municipality, is because of the history. So Île-à-la-Crosse is home to one of the oldest residential schools in this country, which has still yet to be recognized and acknowledged by the federal government, the provincial government. So if you have friends in those spaces, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, like remind them that this is something that is unsettled and not recognized. So it was never part of the URSA, if you've ever heard that term, the Indian residential school settlements that happen for First Nations across the country. So you'll see my grandfather, who I'm sitting with in this photo, and then me and my mom are at the river, which is by the residential school that he went to when he was a kid, which is at the La Plonge Residential School. There was just an announcement of some findings from that area. And then me and a few of my friends, my cookum, my grandmother's best friends from when she was in residential school in Isla Crosse. And so why does this matter? And what connection does this have to climate? Is maybe what you're thinking. This is actually where it all started. And this is where people were displaced from those little islands. Métis, Cree and Dene people were displaced from these islands and forced to live in the community of Isla Crosse. And if you didn't, you lost your rights as an Indigenous person, or you lost your children, or you lost access to any resources. And so displacement was kind of a key tool to have access to land and to resources. And so now, we see that this is where the epicenter of the fur trade existed. And now you fast forward, what is it, 250 years? Isla Crosse is having a 250-year anniversary, a celebration of resilience. We're not celebrating 250 years of colonization. But I think this is an interesting thing to consider, is that once one of the greatest economic drivers in that day was the fur trade. And you fast forward now to this time where our backyard is filled with some of the highest grade uranium in the world. And if you're familiar with the energy system in Saskatchewan, in Canada, and globally, you'll know that the nuclear energy industry is like pushing full bore ahead as being like the cleanest solution to our energy problems. And so I think it's very interesting how displaced communities, displaced people are still struggling with a lot of the socioeconomic issues that you see across Indigenous and marginalized communities across this country, and even globally. And, people are climate refugees, as you've seen recently with wildfires. But if you think about it in a sense of people being displaced from their original homes due to the needs for resources, as they're called, whether it be uranium or critical minerals or oil, it kind of goes back to that history. And so I really wanted to make sure to mention residential school survivors, because I think we don't often connect the dots between residential schools and the energy industry and the impact of climate change, and kind of, the long history of violence on people and on the land and where it started. And I think that is very important for us to understand when we're talking about adaptation, because communities have been having to adapt to different ways of living, to different understandings, to different ideologies that contribute and perpetuate the problems that, colonized systems create. So I think that's a very important piece. Okay, fun pictures. Very sad topic, very real topic, and now fun pictures. I'm gonna move around. So here in this top corner is a photo of some incredible women from my community who, most of them are kind of reclaiming culture. And so if you think about the impact topic being the impact of climate change on people and land, that's one of the significant ones, I think, is loss of culture. I was at an event a few years ago, and I taught these old cookums how to smudge, and we were talking about cultural practices and how they were scared of that. They'd never grown up with that, because for most of their lives they were in residential schools. And as I mentioned, 250 years is about 7 or 8 generations of colonization. So imagine the indoctrination of the church within communities along if you've ever heard of the Bible Belt along the communities, my community being one of those. So that's one of the greatest impacts I see. And then I want to talk about something that a great friend of mine said to me quite a few years ago. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of Harold Johnson. Yeah, he's a legend, legendary. Harold was one of my friends. I worked with him for a little while and had the opportunity to meet him every morning in the parking lot as we'd both be going off to our separate jobs. But he approached me one day and he said, Jordyn, how do we solve the issue of helping people within our communities feel empowered? To feel like, the bush people, the medicine people, all of those people that like live out on the land that, I think the world is moving to a place now where we're actually looking at knowledge keepers and land practitioners as like people of value. And that's not always been the case. And in many spaces, some of which, like if you saw my bio, I struggle with still to try to push forward, having like land-based people be involved in like academic conversations. And that was Harold's question was, how do we bring the same level of merit and value into the hearts and the communities that we know, next to all of the PhDs, the people with master's degrees, the people, that get all these accolades for things that they learn from books. I'm in a master's program right now. Nothing wrong with things that we learn from books. But when it comes to practical lived experience, we discredit the people that actually experience, and by definition of science, observation through trial and error. The original scientists, my boy back there from Big River, the engineers were the beavers. The engineers are the people that understood how fire systems work, right? Understanding that if you burn a certain part of the river, that's going to make space for food for the muskrat. And so the muskrat are going to grow to this size that their ecosystems are going to build and they're going to have access to healthier foods. And I think that's like a huge loss and an opportunity for us as well, is how we actually include land-based folks, Indigenous people that live and breathe out in the bush and have contributed for ages. And I'm not talking about like knowledge that's been in a book for 100 years. I'm talking about knowledge that has been passed down generationally for, centuries. And when you think about like principles and ethics of existing, right? Where did you learn these? Think about your own principles and ethics. Where do you get these? Indigenous communities get these from natural law. Raise your hand if you know what natural law is. Raise your hand if you understand treaties. Come on, we're all treaty people. Raise your hand. So when you think about natural law and you think about treaties, one of the original treaties, or so the story goes, is that the two-leggeds and the four-leggeds, the winged ones, creepy critters, we made an agreement. And the original treaties were between the two-leggeds and all the others. And if you have ever heard of the term Wakutawin or Kakiao Nawagamaganak, is that right, Dennis? Those are understandings of what that relationship means. When you make an agreement with someone, I mean, unless you're on your phone and you're just signing up for Google or something, and you're like terms and conditions, accept. I feel like that's how our treaties were probably done. People were just like, sure, okay, we'll ignore all the rest. This is my comedy skit now. Just kidding. But that original treaty was between the two-leggeds, and that understanding of Kakiao Nawagamaganak is all my relations. And so if you understand what all my relations are, And if you understand this concept that, human beings are not this dominant force to be reckoned with, that we are just like puny, insignificant little pieces of this massive, dynamic universe, and that we're just like a small component of that, then you can maybe understand kakiao nawagamaganach, because that's what it is. It's a balance of all those things. It's an interconnectedness. And I think that's one of the things that we're missing in like climate adaptation, is that true understanding. And when we talk about science, it's like the systematic approach. And so I beg you to ask the question to yourself and to your work, like, what is that system that you're working within? Is it a system that somebody wrote down on paper and asked you to work within those confines? Or is it a system that you exist within? Is it an ecosystem? Is it like your breath leaving your body, feeding a tree, which then feeds you back? That's a relationship. That's a relationship that I bet you don't ever wake up in the morning and think. So I'm going to get back on track here. Harold said, criminal justice requires social justice, requires environmental justice. So what I believe that to mean, and he has passed now, so rest in peace, my friend. But he approached me one day and said, these people, these land-based people, are people that we need to be listening to. And he was a Crown prosecutor for years. He was a Harvard lawyer. He's an Indigenous Cree man from Mullinosa. Brilliant person, an author. If you haven't heard of him, I urge you to look up some of his books. Corvus, interesting one. Post-apocalyptic world, post-climate change apocalyptic world, where Indigenous people survive and everybody else struggles. But Harold brought this up because he was like, okay, we know the solutions. We always have known the solutions. And like, how do we bring those levels back to like balance, And I thought that was a brilliant question. I'm totally gonna run out of time. But I think some examples here, that sign up there, management of native blueberry stands. My cookum is that lady right here. And she used to manage these blueberry stands. Scientist. My mom, little blueberry picker, scientist. My dad owns this wild rice boat. He can tell you all about the hydraulics of a river. I think he graduated high school, I'm pretty sure. Scientist. Those are people that understand the land and understand the solutions that are needed to help in terms of climate adaptation. And I think, the question posed of like, how do we bring merit and value to those folks is we listen. We provide opportunity for people to hold space in the work that we're doing. And I'm just going to share really quickly a few little things like, how do I go back? This old lady, she's 101. She refuses to speak English. She's like, ugh, what a cheap language. She speaks Cree and Michif and Dene. Brilliant woman. Scientist. Her story you'll find on my podcast. I got to get my butt to work though. I got new episodes waiting. Indigenous clean energy. I helped co-found this program called Imagination, which is awesome. It's through 7Gen. If you have youth in your community that are interested in mobilizing energy projects or food water projects, get them to check it out. And a recent one that I'm like, the topic is youth, and I'm like such an old cookum, an old grandma here on the stage. But I believe that if we empower young people and, we do all the boring, tedious work that nobody wants to do anyway, and we just give them all of the tools, all of the understandings that we have gathered over this short period of time, And I think it's kind of funny how Elaine's presentation, it was like a 30-year period. I was like, hey, I've seen some changes on that 30-year period. Anyway, if we provide youth the opportunity, they can change a community. And I had been trying to make things happen in my community for years. And people are like, hey, Jordyn, settle down, little brown Greta. We don't want to listen to you anymore. And I was just so frustrated. I'm like, oh my God, our town council and a lot of the leadership, like a lot of men, a lot of older men, no offense to older men in the crowd, but damn, y'all need to listen more. And the moment I'm telling you, the moment that these young people, I pulled them together and said, like, let's do some work. Let's do some fun stuff. Do you guys, like, what do you want to do? If you could do anything in this community, what would you do? And they brought up all these cool things. Some of them happened to kind of relate to energy, which I was like, please make it relate to energy because that's like kind of my jam. I love that. And it did. And then we went to the mayor and council, the ECDEV, the Friendship Center, all these people were like, oh, communities are just like fight and everybody has their own things going on. And everybody's like, this is amazing. Whatever the youth want to do. Yeah, climate change. And I'm like, what? I was kind of mad because I was like, you never listened, but they're listening. And it's like the secret is providing an opportunity for youth to actually talk about what they want to talk about, because I guarantee they are not clouded, they are not biased by what sort of budget there is to actually do something. They're not clouded by whatever kind of interpersonal nonsense is happening in the community. They're not clouded by, well, what can we actually do based on like the political environment or whatever. They don't care. They just care about what's actually right. So I like urge you, like, listen. Here's a cool one. I never thought I'd work in energy policy, but it is so interesting and it's so fun to sit with federal officials and directors of all of these big programs that fund energy projects and tell them you're doing it wrong. And I'm a part of the Wahila Indigenous Advisory Council. We've been working with the government for about 2-3 years, and is created by Natural Resources Canada. And just this past year, we released this report that former Minister of Natural Resources Canada, Minister Wilkinson, Saskatchewan boy, I think. We released this report, and Canada actually used it in their national electrification strategy, which was pretty badass. It's like a group of Indigenous community members who are leading projects, and I thought that was pretty exciting. And policy does matter, and helping your community understand why policy matters is also a key part of things. This next slide, and I swear I'm done now, is, yo, there it is. This is like 3 members of the youth council, not the guy at the end, the AJ, Donnie, and Evan. Oh, and Audrey. They just spoke on a stage to like over 300 people. I had to trick them to go to Whitehorse. They didn't want to go because they were going to have to speak on a stage. Anyway, and they did, and they killed it. And then Indigenous Services Canada was like, you want to do what kind of projects? Like, how much money do you need and when do you want to do it? And these youth are so stoked. They're so amped up to do the work. And I think we just need to give more credit to young people in our communities that like they can handle it. They're going to inherit it and they can handle it. So give up some of that control, some of that power, and actually try to see it through. Don't just invite them and say, isn't this great? Aren't you learning a lot? It's like, no, like actually involve them. I promise it'll be great. But that's all I got. Thank you so much for listening. And I really hope that made sense.
Thank you, Jordyn. That was wonderful, and I love your energy talking about energy. Lots of great pictures that you had to share with us and talking about your community, which is so was wonderful. We're going to take some questions. Maybe we'll go to online first this time, and then we'll go to the room afterwards. Oh, there's nothing coming in yet. We've got one in the room coming.
This must be intimidating. Thank you, Jordy. What a nice talk. Nice to meet you, Ines Sanchez Rodriguez from South America, Colombia, living here in Saskatoon. What the citizens of this city and the other major cities can do for climate action that is aligned with the Indigenous view of climate action. Thank you.
So what can citizens and leadership do that align with Indigenous climate action? Yeah, I think the biggest thing is like actually including people in planning and not just on the response stage. And I think a good example, and I totally forgot to mention this, it was my first slide, is a situation in La Ranch with wildfires. And you know, there's also Manitoba and Alberta are also facing crisis right now. I was a part of a crisis response team during COVID, and totally different issue, but I think the response side stands the same, is that unless there's like money and coordinated action, governments will not act. And that's problematic because when people see problems happening within community on the ground, like localized need, people need to listen and then figure out all the nonsense later because it puts people's lives in danger. And I think when it comes to Indigenous climate action, I think we're seeing this all the time. And for myself, and I'm 34 in this short period of time, I've experienced like, I used to walk around my community and be able to hear frogs. We used to run away from skunks because they'd be everywhere. Like there was life. Our communities were crawling with life. And if you know anything about the environment, frogs equal healthy ecosystems. We don't hear that anymore. You know, the water is covered in algae. Like I think is understanding that we are in time of severe crisis, especially in Indigenous communities. And it, you know, when we talk about it impacting medicines and we talk about it impacting culture, like that might seem insignificant to somebody, you know, holding the pocketbook in Ottawa or in Regina, but that is not a small thing. And so the seriousness that comes with climate action when it comes to like culture and land-based issues, it doesn't just go to those things or those animals. It's like a part of this bigger issue that affects kind of the very foundational makeup of communities and identity. So I think it's like actually listening to that and like the seriousness of the situation in communities.
Thanks. So our next question, we have time for one more question. Great. We'll take one from online. So the question here, the first one is, can you expand on some of the projects you've implemented in your community and how they were received?
I worked on a community-wide retrofit plan, like an energy efficiency plan years ago. Again, that was when people were like, not interested. Energy efficiency is not sexy. It's not cool. Go away. I think it's super cool. I think it's like, you know, what it's the saying is like, a kilowatt saved is cheaper than a kilowatt produced. Kind of makes sense, you know, if we can serve, we can make a difference that way. More recently, I'm helping the youth do a solar project on the Elders Lodge and on the chicken coop and garden in my community. That's really exciting. We're planning on also visiting Denmark, so then we can begin some community energy planning. Denmark, specifically Samso, Denmark, is an island where it's 100% transition to renewables. It was like one of the first in the world. And I think the only fossil fuels they use is the barge that goes in and out of the community to deliver things. It's a community of about 4,000 people, and kind of the ideology that they base their transition plan on is building a local economy that people want to stay in the community for. And I think that's a beautiful thing for us to paint for young people, is that you don't have to go to a city, you don't have to like move across the world, you don't have to leave, although you can, and it's good to explore. I've definitely explored, and I'm back in my community, and I love it. And I think it's like finding opportunities for people to work and to live and to play, because right now our economy, like I mentioned, is uranium mining. And when I see people in my community that work in mines, and it's shift work, it's draining, it's hard on families, it's really toxic in communities when people come back and just party for a week and spend money on booze and drugs, and then the cycle continues and they go back to rehab for a week. If we can start to build localized economies that are sustainable, and sustainable in the definition of like what's good for the earth, what's good for people, and what is long lasting. And long lasting in a sense of that understanding of wakuthuin, of like helping all within the community. I think if we, and this is so silly to talk about economics and climate change, but I think that is a secret, is to kind of bridge that gap.
That's great, Jordyn. Thank you. And it is something we are talking about quite a bit, is, the cost of climate change and the cost of adaptation, and how we can invest some money up front, and that'll help us in the long run. So economics and climate change are crossing paths quite a bit lately. So thank you.